Hello everyone, I hope you had a great 2022 and a wonderful New Year's Eve, and welcome to 2023. Sorry this video is a little late. I've been working on a board game and that kind of took up a lot of my free time, but I have the prototype coming soon and you might hear more about that in the future. But for now, let's take a look back to the past as we take a look at every game that I played in 2022. As usual, these are being ranked by which ones I enjoyed the most, not which ones are objectively better or worse than the others, and on top of that, I cannot play everything that comes out in a year. I've heard great things about Xenoblade Chronicles and Horizon Forbidden West, which I actually own but couldn't have time to play, so if your favorite isn't here, just let me know in the comments down below and maybe I'll give it a shot at some point. But for now, let's get into the list. Multiverses is a Super Smash Bros. Clone with floaty controls, a wildly unbalanced roster, and a price tag of over $40 to unlock all of the characters without grinding for hours. Not even the hilarious yet expansive cast of characters with full voice acting could make this game fun for more than a few rounds and a couple of chuckles. Aperture Desk Job continues the tradition of the lab by packing in a free demo to show off the features of new Valve hardware. It's a cute 30-minute romp through Aperture, but unlike with VR, there isn't much to really show off with the Steam Deck that we haven't seen before. If you like the lore of Portal and you're desperate to get another crumb of that cake, or if you have a Steam Deck and want to make sure it works properly, then I'd say go ahead and give this game a download. Otherwise, it's not super inventive or funny, just a tech demo that does its job. I really tried to enjoy Curse to Golf, but it just wasn't clicking with me. I don't want to put it on the list because I didn't finish the game, but I did want to go over why I didn't enjoy it and maybe inform others who would like it more. The main premise is that you're a pro golfer who died and got sent to golf purgatory. In order to come back to life, you must complete the 18-hole course, defeating various golfing champions along the way. While this may sound simple, each hole is incredibly long and you only get 5 strokes to start out. To aid in your quest, you can unlock cards that grant special powers and destroy statues for extra strokes. Even with all of this help, however, the game is brutally difficult, with even the slightest mistake dooming your entire run. It's this difficulty combined with the repetition of playing the first few holes over and over that killed my motivation to continue playing. Even the randomized layouts and power-ups couldn't provide enough variety to make restarting a run more interesting. Plus, unlike other roguelike games, you don't get any sense of momentum when you do better on the first few levels. You get a bit of extra cash to buy more power-ups, but I think that if your strokes had carried over instead, the game would have been more to my taste, especially since I typically love golfing games, as anyone who's seen my Last of Us 2 retrospective can confirm. All of that said, it's not poorly made at all. The graphics are well done, the controls are solid, and the premise is cool. I think it's definitely worth giving a shot if you have more patience for that roguelike grind. It just wasn't quite what I was looking for. Overwatch is one of my favorite games of all time. An accessible FPS with diverse characters and impeccable controls, it had me hooked for years. After a while, however, the game simply became less and less fun to play. Whether it was the abundance of shields, the momentum-killing crowd control, or just fatigue from playing the game for so long, I dropped Overwatch shortly after the release of Sigma. I never grew to dislike the game, but felt I'd had my fun and was content with the memories I made along the way. Then came a new announcement. Blizzard dropped the news the sequel to Overwatch was in the works with an all-new single-player campaign and major changes to the multiplayer, along with the switch to a free-to-play model. It would have been pretty exciting news, but every scrap of information that followed took more and more wind out of its sails. The free-to-play change came with the major caveat that the game would now have a battle pass. Not only that, but new heroes would be locked behind said battle pass, making your viability in the meta reliant on either grinding or funding. The game would now be 5v5 and existing characters would be modified to fit this new format, meaning that your favorites had a good chance to play very differently from before. Overwatch 1 was completely shut down, making it impossible to go back and play the original game if you didn't like the changes Blizzard made. Plus now you had to provide a phone number in order to play, locking some people out entirely and making others wary about what Activision would do with their personal data. All of this news, combined with the ongoing disgust at behind-the-scenes harassment of employees taking place at Activision Blizzard, made a lot of people, even those who were excited at first, completely disregard this game. Hell, it's not even really a sequel, especially with the campaign missing at launch. It's more like a 2.0 update, hence it being an honorable mention. Eventually, the update was finally pushed, and while many of the issues mentioned are still there alongside abysmal server issues on the first couple of days, I have to say, the game is still a blast. A lot of that can be credited to Overwatch being a fun game in the first place, but many of the changes introduced a breath of fresh air that it truly needed. Tanks are now limited to 1 per team, and while they're more powerful, many had their shields taken away or weakened, making for more diverse matches instead of just having 2 walls taking turns getting in the way. Many of the heroes also had their crowd control abilities replaced with either all new powers that changed up their playstyle, or alternatives that achieved the same goal without stopping the game's momentum. These subtle changes do so much to improve the overall experience, and got me back into playing from time to time. That said, there are some issues preventing the game from being a staple in my day-to-day gaming, chief among them being the emphasis on teamwork. Now don't get me wrong, I love teamwork, but with the new changes to tanks, that one person becomes integral to the success of the team, which requires that other players work with them to achieve collective goals. If you have a tank that decides to rush in and then run back behind your lines, your team will lose. If your healers decide to focus on combat or ignore the tank hero, you're in trouble. If your damage dealers don't cooperate or choose characters that don't work well with your tank, it's going to be rough trying to push through the enemy team. Unfortunately, the game doesn't do much to push players to work together in this way, even lacking a tutorial on team dynamics, leading to a lot of frustrating matches when playing with strangers, since the switch to 5v5 makes a single clueless or selfish player much more of a liability to the rest of the team, so random matchmaking lobbies can be an exercise in frustration. Plus, with the paltry, greedy approach to Battle Pass rewards, there isn't even much incentive to keep grinding for the sake of unlocks. Overall, I hope to see Overwatch improve even more over time, and may even give the single player a shot when that drops, but for now, it's still the fantastic shooter that it was when it first launched, just with a few too many issues to reach the level of quality that its core gameplay deserves. Temtem is a game that pains me to put at the bottom of this list. I've loved Pokemon since I was a kid, and to see an indie studio not only take on the task of making a game to compete with such a massive franchise, but also have so many elements of the game be this good is astounding. The game came with the promise of so many features that Pokemon has either removed or ignored entirely. Difficult battles, a more adult story, balanced multiplayers, Tems following the player everywhere, home decorating, and all of it wrapped up in this pseudo-MMO with other players roaming around everywhere? This should be the Pokemon game we've all been waiting for. Even the Temtem designs are mostly fantastic, so what could possibly bring this experience down? Well, it turns out that no matter how many individual elements of a game are well made, it all means nothing when the game design is some of the worst I've ever seen. At its core, Temtem is just Pokemon with a focus on double battles. There are different creatures and type matchups, but the game itself is essentially a modification of the Pokemon formula. The question I'm left asking myself is who these tweaks were aimed at. The story is more mature, but only so far as to turn a story for 8-year-olds into one for 10-year-olds, with characters throwing out the word damn here and there, and some more overt references to war and death, but without showing any of the actual consequences of those struggles. The main focus of this game shifts from trying to be the best trainer in the world with a side plot about stopping an evil organization, to a game about fighting in an all-out war while coincidentally being required to defeat this game's equivalent of gym leaders along the way for some of the most contrived reasons imaginable, all while being inundated with long-winded text bubbles from some of the worst dialogue, plot twists, and character choices I've ever seen. The gameplay is supposed to be more difficult than Pokemon, but this leads to some massive balancing issues. Trying to train your team up to a decent level becomes impossibly slow since experience is diminished when you're over-leveled, and the double battle nature of the game almost guarantees constant chip damage on your strongest Tems, forcing you to heal far more frequently when trying to train up the rest of your team. Oh, but don't worry, you can always buy the Battle Pass to make your team gain experience faster. Ah yes, killing the pacing of your game in order to make a quick buck, a flawless strategy. Even then, EVs and IVs are more important than ever, but take forever to accumulate, meaning that every new TEM caught is just another chore needing to be completed before it's viable in battle. This all serves to discourage players from experimenting with different teams and trying new strategies, something that was much easier in Pokemon due to the lower difficulty level. This lengthy grind also makes multiplayer much more difficult to get into since a competitive team takes just too long to acquire. On top of all that, the freedom and convenience seen in Pokemon is nowhere to be found here. Not only is the game itself split into several self-contained islands with little to no interaction between them, but even within each island the story is completely linear. Every single time you come across a fork in the road, the game blocks off one of them until you complete the objective in the other. It's an RPG where exploration is almost pointless and occasionally impossible. Even the side objectives almost entirely boil down to fetch quests, and not the kind where you figure out a small puzzle, but instead just a matter of going to the marked locations on your minimap to progress. You're not going on an adventure, you're checking things off a grocery list. As far as convenience goes, I swear, everything in this game is done to waste your time. You can't instantly fly between islands or even between towns like you can in Pokemon, meaning that each time you want to explore somewhere far from an island's airship port, you're forced to trek through minutes of pointless travel beforehand. Repels don't fend off untamed TEMs, leading to a lot of unnecessary battles. Battle animations, while extremely well done, take forever and can't be turned off. Many untamed TEMs have abilities that make them frustrating to fight when grinding, such as putting your entire team to sleep at the start of a fight, or giving them a status condition that instantly kills them in a set number of turns, a condition that doesn't go away without the use of an item, even between battles. And every single trainer seems to want to tell you their life story before a battle. It's all so frustrating that it made me dread booting the game back up to keep playing. Finishing Temtem takes nearly double the time that an average game of Pokemon would take to beat, with most of that time being spent on filler content. I don't think I've ever played a game where the gap between how badly I want to like it and how much I absolutely hate it was this wide before. The effort put into Temtem is undeniable, but in the end, this game only stands as a testament to the importance of good game design and a warning of what can happen when that's completely ignored. Was anyone really dying for KO the Kangaroo to make his triumphant return? I feel like he stands with Croc and Gex in the lineup of mascots nobody actually cared about. Well, he's back. After his sister goes missing in search of their father, KO must don his father's cursed boxing gloves and use their powers to save the day. Along the way, he has some mild help from his sensei Walter and the town tinkerer Gadget. Traveling from island to island, players will enter various levels and collect enough runes to open more levels to progress until they're able to defeat that island's boss and move on. The controls are surprisingly okay, the environments and characters are well designed, and there are a few fun sliding sections, but the rest of the game flips between mediocre and outright bad. The platforming is basic and slow, and even when there's a new gimmick introduced, it's never something fun or unique. The level design is too straightforward to make exploration interesting, but too simple to make platforming engaging. There are elemental powers, but they're never used in creative ways or make much difference in combat. Speaking of which, the fighting is ridiculously repetitive. Just mash the X button with an occasional Y for a power attack, or a jump to hit flying enemies in Arkham-style brawling. Never gets any deeper than that. Worst of all, the core design makes most of the game pointless. Each level has a multitude of collectibles such as crystals, letters, coins, and runes, but runes are the only thing needed to progress. Coins only unlock new costumes and the occasional heart piece, and the crystals and letters do absolutely nothing as far as I can tell. Why would I go out of my way to collect these things when there's no point? And since the runes are typically given out along the path to the end of the level, why would I try to explore and find hidden items? Top all of that off with some of the most atrocious writing and voice acting I've ever seen, and glitches ranging from bad hitboxes on enemies and platforms to sound or animations deciding not to play, and KO is a game I can only describe with the most insulting word I can use towards a game: boring. Not atrocious, not abysmal, just pointless. The The matriarch is a great idea with a flawed execution. In this game, one player takes the role of the matriarch leading a bunch of nuns, but some of the nuns are players trying to escape. To do so, players must report the hidden 3-digit code in the center of the map with a new digit revealed each day. Meanwhile, other escapees must head underground to dig to find the hidden switches to enter the code, as well as the escape hatch. In contrast, the matriarch must roam the grounds and try to figure out which players are missing, or notice odd patterns in the movement of the nuns to sniff out which are the escapees. Once per night, the matriarch sacrifices a player and it's revealed if they were a sinner. She can also ring a bell near the church once per game to instantly kill 3 nuns. If any of the nuns escape, they win. If they're all killed, the matriarch wins. Simple. The problems come in when you dig into the game design. For one, there's no downside to the matriarch guessing incorrectly and killing an NPC, which means that even if they don't know who's an escapee, they could always just get lucky. As for the nuns, the NPCs never leave their post, always moving in a constant back and forth pattern, meaning the matriarch always knows that any player not actively doing their task is a sinner. All of this means that it's a complete crapshoot as to whether the matriarch catches you, since both sides see the same area around them, making the game more about luck than strategy or imitating the NPCs. And what happens when you die? Well, you can roam around the grounds and try to stun the matriarch, but doing so is really unintuitive with a timer delaying your attack. I think this game is too simple for its own good and becomes more frustrating than tense, which explains why it takes so long to find a game. That, or because half the time I found a game to join, the lobby glitched out in a way that made it impossible to ready up. Little changes, like if the nuns had more options available to them and could see more of the map, the NPCs did more of the move back and forth, the matriarch getting stunned at the beginning of the day after making a bad guess, any of these could improve the experience immensely. As it stands, the matriarch is a cute little experiment that needed a bit more time in the oven before release. What a disappointment this turned out to be. Please Touch the Artwork is a puzzle game developed by only one guy. It uses Mondrian-style art to create 3 different kinds of puzzle games. The first mode is actually pretty fun and novel, tasking the player with placing lines and colors in tricky ways in order to match the painting being shown. Towards the end it can get really tough, and hitting par is surprisingly difficult. Luckily, if one of the puzzles just isn't clicking, there's also a hint system that allows players to progress. Personally, I'd prefer the option to get a few groups of puzzles together and have the game require that a certain number be solved to move on, but that's a minor nitpick. So, you may be wondering what the issue is. The style is commendable, the music, while mostly copyright-free tracks you'll find on YouTube, is good enough, and the first game is unique and entertaining. The problem is that the other 2 game modes are a waste of time. The second mode tasks the player with selecting various squares on the outside of a painting to move along a given track in a way that reaches a goal. While this mode does shake things up frequently with new mechanics and clever twists, none of the puzzles are particularly difficult, and even when they are, guessing and checking is far too easy. Not to mention, when certain tiles begin to change, some of them are broken and don't act as expected, a big problem in a puzzle game. As far as the last mode goes, you know those mazes on the back of cereal boxes? Yep, it's that, but in a video game. Not only that, but it controls terribly. The movement is stiff and jerky since you only choose a direction at junctions. The entire mode is boring as hell and just screams padding. Almost like I can feel the developer worrying about people refunding the game on Steam, so they made this mode just to stretch the game past the 2-hour mark. On top of all that, every game has a similar story about love and connection in which one person makes a mistake and wants their partner back. I seriously want to tell this developer to get over his ex already. Look, I don't like harping on indie games, let alone those made by a single person. What you get with your purchase is one fun, unique puzzle game. It just so happens to come with 2 more shitty games. Luckily, it's available on mobile phones as well as PC, so if you find yourself curious about the game, it's definitely worth the $5 charged on the App Store. It's a solid first attempt, just one that should have put more focus on its best elements. I made an entire video about how much this game disappointed me, so feel free to watch that if you'd like to hear more. But the long and short of it is that Rocksmith Plus is a mediocre follow-up to Rocksmith 2014, Ubisoft's stinginess prevented the tracklist from having many well-known artists and songs, and their greed pushed this game to be a monthly subscription instead of a one-time purchase. If you want to learn to play guitar, I recommend just going for Rocksmith 2014, but if Plus is still around in a year or two, maybe I'll give it another look to see if things have improved. Hyperbolica is a difficult game to write about. The core gameplay consists of running around a world, talking to bland characters, and doing menial chores with tiny minigames in order to find enough items to reach the end. The gameplay is often quite boring, the dialogue can't seem to decide between campy and referential or analytical and reflective of society in the internet age, the commentary on the metaverse and other such projects is pretty surface level, the game only takes an hour or two to beat, and there really isn't much to care about outside of the aesthetics. All of that being said, just look at the aesthetics! The entire game takes place in a non-Euclidean hyperbolic world where each level acts as a small planetoid that warps around you as you traverse the environment. It's one of the most unique visual designs in all of gaming. I can't even imagine how hard it was to make this world a reality, especially working in VR. It truly showcases how video games can give us a new experience unlike any other with just a bit of creativity. So while the game is pretty short, could cause motion sickness in some, and more or less amounts to being a tech demo, it's also unlike anything else you've ever experienced. If you find Hyperbolica on sale and want to give it a shot, go for it. Just don't go in expecting a full game. Silt is an interesting idea for a game. A black and white 2D puzzle platformer, the game clearly borrows a lot of concepts from Playdead's Limbo. Here, you take the role of a scuba diver exploring mysterious underwater environments and ruins as you make your way through the game's 4 chapters. Obviously, the visuals are stunning, using the monochrome color palette to give the game an imposing, tense atmosphere, though the environmental storytelling is a bit too light and vague to remain intriguing, which puts extra focus on the gameplay to keep players engaged, and it does succeed to a degree. Silt has a few cool ideas to help it stand out, with the diver being able to take control of the various sea life they encounter in order to progress. However, unlike Limbo or Little Nightmares, Silt is almost entirely puzzle-based, with very little platforming or split-second decision-making. This leaves the game with less variety and puts a lot of pressure on the puzzles to really get you thinking. And while some are interesting and fun to figure out, many simply boil down to looking around the environment to find the sea life you can control before following a straightforward path to a solution. On top of that, the game is incredibly slow-paced. Cutscene speed, character movement, level design, it's all made much slower than it needs to be. I'm assuming this is another unfortunate attempt by an indie dev to make the game longer than Steam's refund period, but it's to the game's detriment. And even then, it only lasts like 1.5 to 3 hours. All that aside, Silt is certainly an enjoyable experience, just a flawed one. So if you like this style of game, I can recommend diving in. Roller Champions is one of the most difficult games to place on this list. The latest in a long line of multiplayer games trying to be the next Fortnite or Rocket League, from Rocket Arena to Knockout City to Destruction All-Stars, it's probably the most fun and unique online multiplayer experience since Fall Guys. 2 teams of skaters compete to get a ball around the arena. More loops mean getting more points when you score, but losing possession even once sends your team back to the start. When you're on a solid team and facing tough opponents, the game hits its peak in the best ways. Tense moments right before scoring a big comeback goal are positively electric, and defense is just as rewarding when you nail someone with a surprise uppercut. It's fast, it's brutal, it's unfinished. Yeah, while Roller Champions can be a lot of fun when you first pick it up, that fun is short-lived when you notice the lack of variety and options for play. It starts with character customization being limited to body shape, skin tone, and face shape. With everything else being left to the cosmetic items, most of your first few matches will be full of people in the same gray t-shirt. Matches have no music during gameplay, leaving the atmosphere feeling kind of empty as you blast your way around the ring. And the arenas are all identical in terms of design, no creative ways to change up the gameplay, such as a circle, putting shortcuts in the center, teleporters, or even placing ramps in different locations. It all screams that the team wanted this to be standardized in an attempt to make the game viable for competitive play, but doing so to the detriment of the game's naturally chaotic fun. Plus, the fact that you can't search for a new game after finishing a match without going back to the main menu is just pathetically outdated. With more wackiness, such as character abilities or unique track design, this could have been incredible, but as it is, Roller Champions is just a fun time for a while that fizzles out quickly. though it's not a game I'm opposed to coming back to every once in a while. The best way that I can think of to describe Ghostwire Tokyo is missed potential. When I first saw the gameplay trailers, I was psyched for this game. An open-world first-person shooter where you roam the streets of Tokyo defeating evil yokai using the power of ghost magic? That sounds incredible! And to its credit, the game is enjoyable overall. Visually impressive in terms of graphical fidelity, but even better is the imagination with which the world is brought to life. Clothes on the ground reminiscent of the Rapture, the imaginative creature designs that would give any child nightmares, the animated sequences in which the world warps around you or presents you with a cool new visual, it's an incredible spectacle. And the story of the main character being possessed by a ghost and working together to stop a madman from killing his sister and sacrificing the souls of everyone in Tokyo is engaging, with some great voice acting and decent dialogue. The open world is massive and full of little nooks and crannies hiding secrets, to the point where I almost felt like I visited Tokyo myself. The problem is that absolutely none of this blends together to create a game that's more fun than the sum of its parts. The shooting is incredibly stiff and feels really unnatural. I spent quite a while fiddling with the settings to try and make it feel better, but it always felt awkward. Certain abilities such as the water blast and grappling tengu can be inconsistent. There are maybe 6 enemy types in terms of how they attack, so they get pretty boring halfway through the game, with most of the difficulty coming from a lack of invincibility frames, low ammo capacity, and getting turned around when changing weapons. The aesthetic is never used to complement the gameplay, only serving as set dressing instead of modifying the way you have to approach various fights. And while the overworld is massive, it's another Ubisoft-style game where the map is cluttered with various items, and most of them are of no use by the midway point. The side missions mostly involve going into a house or following an NPC before fending off some generic enemies to cleanse a spirit, which gets incredibly repetitive. There are even little things like the menus not being snappy and the story having a stop-and-go nature that makes each main mission overloaded with constant cutscenes. Despite it being an open-world game, it feels like you're either on rails or doing busy work. It's moderately entertaining busy work, but nothing spectacular. This game should have been a breath of fresh air for the FPS genre, but instead it gives into the worst, most generic tropes possible while hoping its unique art direction provides enough of a distraction for 11 to 13 hours. Ghostwire Tokyo is the gaming equivalent of going to a fancy restaurant and getting served a Big Mac. The plating is nice and it tastes okay, but it definitely fails to live up to expectations it sets for itself. Metroidvanias have become a mainstay in the indie development scene. There's just something about gaining new abilities to explore a massive map that never gets old. Many of these games pull directly from the titles that give the genre its namesake, such as Axiom Verge and Guacamelee, but one that's made the biggest impression is, of course, Hollow Knight. Combining gorgeous visuals with a lore-rich world and tight, exciting combat, it's the standout title in a sea of great games. So it's no wonder that with the wait for Silksong leaving many with bated breath, there would eventually be games that take inspiration from Hollow Knight itself, which brings us to Haiku the Robot. While all Metroidvanias have similar elements in their design, there's no doubt that this game pulls from Hollow Knight specifically as its biggest inspiration, and it's a success both as a tribute and in its own right. By comparison, the combat in Haiku is a bit more tactical, replacing the tight, quick brawls with measured, careful swordplay. The visuals are pixelated instead of hand-drawn, but still manage to impress with detailed backgrounds, unique enemy designs, and creative special effects that I haven't seen anywhere else. The lore isn't quite as deep, but still manages to be intriguing enough to hold attention for the length of the game. Otherwise, the games are ridiculously similar. Replace bugs with robots, soul vials with oil, badges with chips, and keep the train station and world design. Many of the enemies even have one-to-one equivalents between the games. Still, there's nothing wrong with wearing your inspirations on your sleeve, and Haiku the Robot certainly manages to be both unique and fun enough to impress on its own merits. That said, there are a few notable flaws. The delay before regaining control of your character after respawning is awkwardly implemented, leading to a few repeat falls into pits. The train station can be hard to come by, making traversal a bit tedious at times. Some areas are confusing to navigate, with empty hallways that lead nowhere and only serve to waste your time. The waiting period between uses of your abilities and slow self-healing bring the game to a screeching halt. None of these are game killers, just notable problems that keep the experience from reaching its maximum potential. Those issues aside, with its creative visuals, fun abilities, exciting boss fights, and extensive world, Haiku the Robot is a fun time for those looking for their next Metroidvania experience. I am not a cat guy, but even I could see the appeal of Stray. A beautiful game with some great animation in which the player explores the world as a cat with all of the advantages and disadvantages that entails. In theory, it sounds unique, creative, and adorable. Though, after seeing some trailers and watching everyone get hyped, I still have one pressing question. What kind of game is it? And now that I've finally played it, I'm still not sure there's an answer. The game controls exceptionally well and looks fantastic. There are a few graphical and camera bugs here and there, but nothing too distracting, and while the button prompt-based platforming can be slightly tedious and doesn't always send you to the right platform, it does add to the feeling of being a graceful, sleek feline making your way through this massive city, though not everything is so polished. Playing Stray is like ordering dim sum. Rather than getting one big meal to fill you up, you get a bunch of little bites to add up to a full game. Unfortunately, some plates are better than others. The majority of this game has your cat exploring a city and conversing with the robot inhabitants with the help of a friendly drone in order to discover what happened to the now post-apocalyptic world and how to return to the surface. This is how new paths forward are unlocked in the story. That sounds interesting on the surface, but very few of the NPCs are interesting to talk to, and most puzzles are incredibly simple and reward the player with nothing of value. It would have been nice to at least get some different outfits for the little guy, but in-game there's no real reason to do more than needed to reach the end. The lore is mildly interesting to uncover, but it's not much more than we've seen in dozens of other post-apocalyptic landscapes. When outside the city, the player is usually tasked with evading swarms of flesh-eating creatures or sentry drones. This can involve chase sequences, stealth segments, a weird take on a third-person shooter, or kiting them around for traps in an escort mission. While some of these sequences can be fun and tense, the majority simply aren't fleshed out enough to be engaging. They're either incredibly obvious, or, in the case of stealth, slow and frustrating. None of these segments are awful, but none of them really stand out either. Stray is a game that bets everything on its premise. If you want to play as a cat, do cute cat things, and check out a neat cybernetic world, you'll find exactly what you're looking for. But if that's not enough to get you excited, especially for a 3-hour, $30 game, then this probably isn't the game for you. Personally, I enjoyed the novelty, but I'm gonna stick with dogs for the time being. As many viewers of the channel know, one of my goals in life is to eventually start developing games of my own, and the kind of game I've wanted to make for the longest time has always been a 3D platformer in the vein of Banjo-Kazooie and Mario 64, with some retro graphics to cover up for my non-existent 3D modeling skills. Well, it looks like Cyactro beat me to the punch with their first game, McBat 64, in 2017. And this year, they followed that project up with Super Kiwi 64, an indescribably nostalgia-filled adventure through 8 small levels of collectathon goodness. The game is certainly bare bones with its limited options, lack of tutorial or story, and basic level design, but when you're running through those tiny worlds, gliding through the air, finding hidden secrets, and pogo jumping your way up the walls, it's impossible to do so without a smile. The graphics really do look like they've been pulled straight out of an N64 game, but with tweaks to the controls, draw distance, and camera offered by modern technology. Is it the most ambitious game to come from a solo dev? No, the game's only $3 on Steam and can be completed in like an hour. But if you're looking for a fun new title and something to keep you busy for a little while, Super Kiwi 64 is an excellent game for anyone who enjoys platformers. As someone who hasn't played a Kirby game since the Crystal Shards on the N64, the Pink Puff Ball has always been intriguing to me. Some games are seen as baby's first platformer, while others are revered as truly unique and creative explorations of new ideas in the platforming genre. Kirby's been a mech pilot, a bundle of yarn, a clay ball, and defeated demons capable of wiping out the universe, but now this lovable glutton is going somewhere he's never gone before. 3-dimensional movement. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is the first truly 3D platformer in the series, and it seems like a perfect fit. Between the hovering, copy abilities, and fun aesthetic, Kirby has always had the potential to be a stellar 3D title. However, Mario's last outing also had similar copy abilities, so what does the Forgotten Land do to distinguish itself? Well, for one, this isn't an open-world platformer, but rather a course-clear game like Super Mario 3D World. Rather than exploring an open area to unlock hidden collectibles, this game is more about reaching the end of the level and looking for some side areas or completing extra objectives along the way to save more Waddle Dees and progress. If that sounds pretty standard, it is. As Kirby's first outing in 3D, it's apparent that the developers wanted to avoid taking too many risks and focused on solid platforming, level design, and visuals. The controls are nearly perfect. The copy abilities are fun for the most part, with plenty of variety to keep the different stages interesting. There's even the new Mouthful mode, granting Kirby temporary powers based on the object he's enveloping. While certain actions like the leg slide and dodge roll feel like they have a bit of lag to them, the game as a whole feels natural and enjoyable to play. On the other hand, the level design is surprisingly standard. There's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's mostly bland straight lines with the occasional side area. While the small puzzles and combat challenges can be fun, actually traversing a level is pretty much the same as any generic platformer released in the past 2 decades. There are some levels that shake things up, some extra challenges utilizing specific powers, and various gimmicks that differentiate the levels from one another, but by the end of the game the repetition did set in, particularly with the slow pace and grindy unlockables later on. Even searching for secrets can be a pain due to the litany of invisible walls and needing to replay an entire level from start to finish if certain collectibles or objectives are missed. And the game does get a little bloated with subpar features like the Waddle Dee Town minigames or the slow overworld traversal. Visually, the game is charming and some textures look genuinely impressive up close, though the visuals at a distance have a distractingly low frame rate. And while the music is fine, it is kinda forgettable. All in all, The Forgotten Land is a solid first attempt at the 3D Kirby game and sets a good foundation for future games to build upon. It's nothing amazing, but I can assure you that just about anyone who plays this game will have a good time. When I first saw Logicality, I was flabbergasted. I was so surprised that SV Games wasn't actively being sued by Jonathan Blow for ripping off The Witness. The visuals, the setting, the general gameplay progression, and even some of the puzzle concepts are pulled directly from its clear inspiration. I picked it up out of curiosity, thinking it would just be a buggy mess using the art style to lure in unsuspecting players, but I couldn't have been more wrong. While Logicality does borrow a lot from its inspiration, the game is a delight in its own right. The puzzles range from extremely simple to surprisingly clever, there are hidden secrets all over the island, the use of buttons instead of a grid helps to distinguish itself enough to feel new, it's not a ripoff, it's a love letter. Not only that, but it even improves on some of the issues I have with The Witness by increasing the walking speed and removing many excessive puzzles that make Logicality feel better paced and more streamlined by comparison. While this game has its flaws, such as a couple of puzzles that could have used a bit less abstraction, some graphical bugs, and frame rate optimization issues, none of these bog it down too much. It's only $8 on Steam and takes only 1 to 2 hours to beat depending on if you go for the normal ending or 100%, so if you're looking for a fun new puzzle experience that'll really get you thinking, Logicality is a great game to check out. Okay, I swear, I don't have a problem. Released just 3 days after Logicality, The Looker is another title taking clear inspiration from The Witness. The art of parody is one usually only seen in passing when it comes to gaming. An offhanded reference here, an homage there, maybe a fourth wall breaking joke to poke fun at another title. It's not very often we get an entire game satirizing another, but that's exactly what The Looker was made to do. I first heard about the game through Donkey's video, as I'm sure did many others. It was a funny video showcasing some of the game's jokes and got me to give it a shot. Not only is the game free and just as hilarious as the video implied, but The Looker goes beyond being a simple parody of The Witness and actually manages to be a solid puzzle game in its own right. The references are fantastic, the use of gaming tropes and player expectations are excellently suited for comedy, and many of the puzzles maintain the out-of-the-box thinking seen in Blow's original game. Not only that, but it has a run button, the one thing The Witness needed more than anything else. Better than it has any right to be, if you've got an hour to kill and want to have a good time with some solid puzzles, The Looker is definitely a game you'll enjoy. I went back and forth on this one for a long time. I just couldn't decide whether Sonic Frontiers is the worst good game ever made or the best bad one. In the end, I've decided on the latter because despite it being one of the most fun 3D Sonic games ever released, its objective flaws are abundant. Having a true open world to speed through to your heart's content is the exact kind of shakeup Sonic needed. With obstacles and mini-challenges everywhere, exploring is an absolute delight. The combat is flashy, if simple, with a good number of enemy types to take on. The platforming zones are incredibly well designed and often flow into one another naturally. The environments also look pretty good, though I still maintain that Sonic games should try to ditch the realistic style and switch back to more abstract environments. The music is some of the best in the series' history, which is really saying something. So much so that I checked Spotify every couple of weeks until the soundtrack was released so I could amp up my cardio playlist. Even the story has some legitimately well-written dialogue, giving a sense of growth to these characters that have been otherwise stagnant for decades. However, all of this is bogged down by some fundamental flaws and terrible design decisions. The traditional Sonic stages are mostly well designed, but the controls are terrible in both 2D and 3D. From the major problems like Sonic being railroaded in specific directions with terrible steering and camera control being taken away, or jumps killing all momentum, to minor choices like controlling the ring dash with a click of the stick instead of a button, or needing to hold jump to activate the drop dash. Hell, they didn't even include the spin dash. Parrying is also baffling since you need to hold the bumpers down and wait for a hit, requiring no element of timing. In the open world, things are better with the wide space giving more room for error, but even then the controls can be a problem. Sonic will often go flying off into space after tripping on a slight dip in the environment that's invisible to the naked eye. Rails can be a pain to attach to. Running up walls seems cool, but only works half the time. And the forced switches to 2D in the environment are both jarring and an unwelcome restriction on movement with no way out. Then there's the world itself. The map is unlocked sporadically, so it's not super useful until it's completely open. Completed zone challenges don't disappear, making it difficult to figure out which ones have yet to be completed. Some trials only appear at night and force the player to wait for minutes just to play the game, and many tasks are simply too slow, boring, or repetitive to be fun. The game also loves to annoy you and impede your progress for no reason, whether it be the enemies that constantly stop you in place until defeated, the stupid little slot machine that can't be removed on certain nights, or the never-ending invisible walls blocking you from reaching otherwise completely accessible areas. There's also the pop-in, which I've heard some people describe as a non-issue or just an aesthetic problem, but I couldn't disagree more. In a game about exploration and trying to figure out how to reach collectibles, being unable to see the paths in the distance is a major hindrance to the gameplay experience since it frequently prevents you from knowing where to go next. Even the upgrade system is a chore, with 2 of the game's 4 stat upgrades requiring the player to talk to an NPC and upgrade each level one by one. Does any of this mean that Sonic Frontiers is a bad game? Yes it does. Kind of. Sonic Frontiers is not a good game, but it is still fun enough in doses to make it one of the most inconsistent set of highs and lows I've ever played. I mean, it did beat out Kirby for me simply due to having some of the most unique fun I've had this year, one of the benefits of taking these kinds of risks. It sounds like a cliche at this point, but it really is a promising step in the right direction that could eventually lead to a truly excellent 3D Sonic game. I really hope the next game takes these concepts and runs with them, building on the foundation to create the Sonic game fans have been waiting on for years. But with Sonic Team at the helm, I think the best any of us can hope for is cautious optimism. Does a video game need decent gameplay in order to have merit? That's the question I ask myself when thinking about Immortality, the latest game from Sam Barlow, who's known for his work on Her Story and Telling Lies. While I haven't played his other FMV games before, I have played another game he had a part in, Silent Hill: Shattered Memories, which I really enjoyed. Immortality is a difficult game to describe without spoilers, but I'll do everything in my power to avoid anything that could hinder one's enjoyment of the game. The premise is that an actress named Marissa Marcel starred in 3 movies, none of which were ever released before her disappearance decades ago. Recently, someone has come across a cache of clips and behind-the-scenes footage from all 3 films. They've been entered into a matching algorithm that allows the player to pause the clips at any time and click on an object or person of note in a frame in order to be shown a different clip with a similar object in it. From there, the player is able to navigate the clips in an attempt to unravel the central mystery of what happened to Marissa Marcel. Aesthetically, the game is unbelievable. The attention to detail in the various movies showcase the different ways to achieve special effects, excellent costume design, and some of the best acting I've ever seen. I genuinely think that despite this being a video game, Manon Gage has a good argument for Oscar contention for her role here, and none of the other cast members are far behind. A truly haunting set of performances backed up by a similarly chilling plot. The story being told here is absolutely incredible, and something I'm sure I'll never forget. Not only are each of the 3 films interesting and entertaining in their own right, but the subplot explaining Marcel's disappearance is one of the most original stories of this decade. Not only that, but while many stories that contain similar mysteries to those found here would fail to explain how all of the pieces fit together, Immortality has a satisfying, unendingly clever explanation for every single question a player could ask, provided they pay attention and unlock every clip. Though, that's where the game runs into issues. While the story itself can be a lot of fun, the game is reliant on an algorithm to its major detriment. Since there's no way to guarantee unlocking the next clip needed to better understand the story, the most efficient way to go about finding clips is to just constantly pause and click on random objects without watching anything. It's a game whose gameplay actively discourages you from watching the clips that explain its story. Even worse is that some of these clips can repeat ad nauseum, leaving some players feeling stuck and others reaching the end credits without understanding half of what's going on. There's no way to know how close you are to solving the mystery, even after you discover the game's various twists. There's no logic here, it's entirely random. Not only that, but after figuring out the real task you've been assigned, the act of solving the mystery from there simply involves going through each clip one by one and performing the same exact steps over and over and over in order to scrub out tiny morsels of information with no guarantee that you even have everything you need. Plus, the game explains so little that even getting that far can be an exercise in boredom and frustration. Even beyond that, the game was constantly stuttering when I rewound the tapes, something that I thought was an artistic choice at first since my PC wasn't showing any signs of struggling, but it turned out to be an issue with the game itself. It made figuring things out much more difficult, which is really irritating when you consider that the game only has about 4 gameplay features total. It just shows that the story of Immortality deserves better than its gameplay can provide. Is it worth putting up with the game's bullshit to have this experience? Absolutely. Especially for those who aren't put off by the artsiness of it all. But that shouldn't be necessary. While I understand the reason this wasn't simply made into a movie, I think that giving the player a bit more to do with their controls and having less reliance on random chance would have made this a Game of the Year contender, perhaps even better. As it is, Immortality is an unforgettable, incredible experience trapped within a prison of its own existence. Is that a spoiler? Every year, there seems to be a new indie game that finds just the right audience and hits in just the right way to make a massive impact. This year, that honor goes to Vampire Survivors. At its core, this is an incredibly simple game where you walk around as your character automatically fires various weapons at incoming enemies in order to gain experience and level them up. In fact, playing this game hit me with a small nostalgia wave as I remembered playing old Flash games on Newgrounds and addicting games. See, Vampire Survivors combines the fun of a tower defense game's engine building with the shoot-em-up's chaotic bullet hell. You're constantly trying to get the slightest bit stronger as wave after wave of seemingly impossible to stop enemies is barely being held back. It's a truly addicting feeling and makes the time you spend playing pass by in an instant. As the game goes on, you'll constantly unlock new characters, weapons, and buffs until the struggle of the upgrade screen becomes less about finding the weapon you think is most powerful and more about finding balance between survivability, damage output, fire rate, and future evolutions. Each new character has their own stats and ability, with different levels all having their own gimmicks and unique enemies to keep things fresh and exciting. And there are a seemingly infinite number of secrets to uncover and new modes to unlock. The choices are never ending. Do you take the weaker weapon now in the hopes that you can power it up later, or do you grab an item that clears all enemies on the screen even if it's likely to screw over your future progress? These kinds of decisions are made every single time you gain a level, making no two runs the same after you get your bearings. However, this is where the game loses me a bit. Given its simplicity, it has to get the basics just right in order to keep that momentum going, but to say Vampire Survivors has a slow start is an understatement. In the beginning, you're given so little direction that figuring out your goal, let alone how to achieve it, is a confusing mess. Yes, you unlock more items as you discover the game's various elements, but it would have been extremely helpful to have some sort of guide or at least an explanation of what the items do. Don't get me wrong, I like exploration and discovery in my games, but Vampire Survivors almost demands a wiki alongside it to get the most out of the experience. There are also some additional features that would have gone a long way to improving the pacing, such as a fast forward button or simply not scaling the price of upgrades with the player. Combine these faults with the endgame mostly being about standing around, enemies being similar and acting more as fodder with different health bars than actually varied challenges, and the reliance on RNG, and the game can be slightly frustrating at times. Even the visuals, which can become an absolute spectacle towards the end of a run, get so cluttered with weapons, enemies, and special effects that you can often take damage without even being able to see why. However, these problems are either subjective or negligible in most cases. Vampire Survivors might not be the ultimate engine builder that many diehard fans have made it out to be, but it is undeniably fun. The perfect way to just turn off your brain and accept the slow dose of serotonin as a bunch of hellspawns succumb to your impenetrable Bone Zone and Bible Study combo. And for only $5, it's definitely a game I can recommend to anyone looking for a good time. Freshly Frosted is the coziest game of the year, bar none. In this pastel-coated dreamscape, you're tasked with organizing conveyor belts in the clouds to make donut factories. Each level has specific requirements for which kinds of donuts to place, and new gimmicks to keep the gameplay fresh. Each of the game's 12 donut boxes contains 12 levels that increase in difficulty and complexity as they go on, with new boxes introducing mechanics like teleporters, alternating gates, stationary conveyors, and more. Each of these ideas manages to change the way you think about every level and makes each new box an exciting prospect for more fun. The levels are simple to control, with the player only being able to place conveyors, empty the board, and undo or redo their actions, but that allows you to focus on the puzzle itself without any tedious menus or management getting in the way. The aesthetic is also commendable. With a premise as dreamlike as making donut factories in the sky, the atmospheric music and cute, clean visual style make you want to just grab a blanket and a coffee before hopping in. And watching the donuts make their way to the various counters at the end of every level while synced to the music is immensely satisfying. There's also a narrator who explains the game's mechanics as they're introduced and gives a quip at the start and end of each level. Each level starts off with some message about donuts. It could be a pun, a fun fact, or a new way to profess her love. You'd think that would get annoying, but the kitschy charm is really sweet, and it's kinda impressive that the game managed to find 144 ways to talk about donuts. Plus, if you do get annoyed, you can turn the narration off in the menu. Matching the chill atmosphere is the game's lackadaisical approach to progression. Each level will grant the player a hint, but the game never rushes you or interrupts your gameplay to ask if you'd like help. The option is just there for those who want it. Plus, there's only one hint per level, most of which are only the slightest of nudges in the right direction. And I definitely needed that nudge on some of the later puzzles, since even with a hint, many of them took me a long time to figure out. Luckily, the game also allows you to skip puzzles as you please, meaning that if you're truly stuck, you can always move on to the next challenge, or even the next box, and come back when you're ready to give it another shot. While I do wish that the later puzzles included more combinations of the game's various mechanics, I doubt anyone would call the game lacking. Freshly Frosted is just like the perfect donut, colorful, sweet, and satisfying to the very last bite. Have you ever wanted to play through the Persona 5 intro video? Soaring through the air, gliding through the streets effortlessly? Well, Neon White might just be the game for you. I've reviewed a few first-person platformers over the year, Seum, Lovely Planet, Cluster Truck, but this is the first time a game has truly blown me away. Making a first-person platformer is ridiculously challenging. players have no concept of where their feet land, conveying a real sense of speed can lead to the game being overwhelming, and most importantly, the controls have to be nearly flawless. Neon White handles all of these things in a style that matches the aforementioned Persona 5 with Danganronpa, and Machine Girl's music perfectly matching the gameplay, making for an exhilarating experience. You play as White, a former assassin sent to heaven to participate in a contest, slaying demons in exchange for forgiveness. Along the way, you'll meet a colorful cast of characters, pardon the pun, rise up in the ranks, and learn the true nature of life after death. Between missions, you can talk to many of these characters to learn their backstories and clear up White's amnesia. I've heard complaints of the tropiness of some, especially Violet, but I don't think that's really the issue here. The characters aren't supposed to be seen as cool or edgy, they're supposed to be seen as goofballs, and I think a lot of people take them way too seriously. The core story is engaging enough, but while the conversations can be fun, they go on a bit too long and there's far too many. While the main game does a great job of respecting the player's time with instant restarts, the menus and gift giving in the visual novel sections feel underdeveloped and bring the game to a screeching halt, though the fast forward button and reward of side quest levels with special rules does make up for this. That aside, these are merely distractions from the fast-paced, frantic gameplay. Each level tasks the player with killing every demon around while also reaching the end. Along the way, White picks up playing cards that can either be shot like normal guns or tossed away for platforming abilities. The game does an excellent job of introducing new cards and enemies over time, so it never feels overwhelming. At the end of each level, the players receive a medal, the color of which depends on their completion time, and getting a gold or blue medal rewards the player with an increase in rank. Since only a few rank increases are required for each new chapter, players can always take things slow on a particularly tricky stage, though going for the number 1 spot is a ton of fun. This is all topped off with levels adding replay value in the form of presents to find. This adds exploration and puzzle elements that are still fun and engaging despite being so slow compared to the normal level objectives, while also rewarding players with new memories that unlock the game's true ending. Neon White is a game you won't want to put down after picking it up, though I do want to mention that I played it on PC, so I can't speak to how much more difficult it plays with a controller compared to with a mouse and keyboard. That stipulation aside, Neon White is an excellent game, and I can't wait to see what Ben Esposito has in store for us next. Have you ever met one of those douchebags who thinks games like The Sims and Animal Crossing aren't for real gamers? Well, I think Cult of the Lamb might be the game to change their mind. You play as a sacrificial lamb brought back to life by a chained-up deity to create a cult and destroy the bishops keeping it trapped. The game is split into 2 parts, a roguelike combat experience and a town simulator. By growing your cult, you can gain new powers and abilities that help in combat, and exploring the dungeons gives you plenty of resources to keep your cult happy and cared for. It's this symbiotic relationship that really helps Cult of the Lamb stand out from its peers. The combat is serviceable, but nothing particularly new. You receive a variety of randomized weapons and power-ups used to fight a slew of enemies until finally defeating each new area's bishop. While most actions are quick and snappy, there are some hitboxes that extend past the animated area, and foreground elements can often get in the way of incoming enemies and projectiles, leading to some instances of getting hit without being able to see what was coming. Still, there's enough enemy variety and little surprises to keep the dungeon exploration generally entertaining for the game's entire runtime. Though I do wish some of the boss fights were more difficult. Many just rely on wasting time by summoning smaller enemies rather than making their own attacks difficult to dodge. However, it's the other half of the game that makes Cult of the Lamb really stand out. After harvesting supplies and rewards on your journey, you return to your cult. Here, you can convert those you saved to be your followers, and by keeping them happy, they'll reward you with worship and hard work, granting you new powers when out in the wilderness. Caring for the cult is incredibly fun and engaging work. You have to make sure your followers are well fed, get enough sleep, clean the place without getting sick, and deal with a never-ending list of potential problems that can come your way. As such, managing the cult was so rewarding that I actually became disappointed when I had to go back to fighting. To add to all of that, the game's art direction is absolutely stellar. It's cute when it needs to be, sinister when it should be, and always manages to impress in its creativity and excellent character design. As far as negatives go, the game also has a bevy of side quests to complete, but most of them are either boring or tedious. Collecting decorations for your cult, beating your mentor's friends in a silly dice game, and fishing aren't the most entertaining activities, but they can occasionally be decent distractions from the frantic management and combat of the rest of the game. There are also quite a few graphical bugs, particularly with the floor textures. I think the programmers forgot to have new floor tiles delete old ones, which not only causes clipping, but also slows down the game as it tries to load a bunch of tiles when it shouldn't. None of these are serious problems, but they do occasionally get in the way of your fun. Cult of the Lamb is a rare case of a game combining two genres that shouldn't work together in a way that improves the experience of both. So if anything I've mentioned thus far has piqued your interest, grab some Kool-Aid and give it a shot. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I have an immense fondness for collectathon 3D platformers. Mario, Banjo, Spyro, Astro, hell, I even made a video essay about Balan Wonderworld. There's just something about exploring new environments, figuring out clever ways to utilize a game's moveset to reach new areas, and unlocking new abilities to make traversal faster and more fluid that always clicks with me. The genre may have fallen off in popularity since its heyday, but playing games like Hell Pie makes it seem like they're as popular as ever. As the demon of bad taste, you're tasked with collecting all of the ingredients for the devil's birthday pie. To do this, the chef sends you into various circles of hell to look for vile ingredients like rotten eggs or a used tampon. Graphically, there's nothing sophisticated here, but the varied settings and vibrant color palette do keep things lively. The music isn't much to write home about either, but each track services its level fine enough. The game's comedy is certainly childish, but in a charming, nostalgic way. Yes, you fight a bunch of sentient poop Nazis, but the implication that since Nazis are such pieces of shit that they take on its form when going to hell has all of the appeal of an early South Park episode. Little visual gags like this, or the use of video game tropes as a medium for shock comedy, sometimes garner a giggle, but more importantly establish an identity for Hell Pie unlike anything seen since Conker's Bad Fur Day. Many will be put off by its crass nature, but if you can get past that, there's an excellent game waiting for you. Being a platformer, nothing else matters if it's not fun to explore, and in that regard, I'd say Hell Pie is one of the best 3D platformers to come out in the past decade. You have your typical moveset with a double jump, wall climb, and basic attacking moves, but the game's main mechanic is using the cherub attached to your horns to swing through the air for extra distance. Mastering this mechanic is key for reaching otherwise inaccessible platforms around the various levels. Exploration is rewarded handsomely, granting power-ups such as additional swings and more mobility, while collecting unicorns upgrades your horns with new powers such as a glide or speed boost, which makes traversal more and more fun as time goes on. Each new elevator brings the player to a unique hub world with additional levels inside. The hub world focuses largely on exploration, while the inner levels offer more of a straightforward challenge with some side collectibles along the way, adding a ton of variety. The game accommodates all kinds of players since the ending can be reached without any exploration, but finding new collectibles makes the levels much easier while also allowing clever players to reach places they otherwise wouldn't be able to by utilizing their entire moveset. This kind of freedom is always the best part about these kinds of games, and I can't wait to see what kind of bonkers tricks speedrunners will eventually be able to pull off. It's not a perfect game, however. The camera can sometimes pull back to an awkward angle or get stuck, making jumps trickier than they needed to be. If you swing into a wall, you bonk off of it instead of grabbing on for a wall climb, which feels really unnatural and unfair. Some of the collectibles can be difficult to see, especially the tiny golden cat statues, and the frame rate can stutter pretty badly at times, even on the PS5. Plus, while the game has plenty of content, it still feels unfinished since half of the elevators and rooms to the 7 deadly sins are inexplicably locked. These are all small problems in the grand scheme of things, but they do hold the game back from reaching its full potential. Still, if you're a fan of platformers and want to try out a wonderfully crafted, adorably crass experience, Hell Pie is an excellent choice. I was not expecting Strange Horticulture to grip me in the way that it did. A 2D puzzle game in which the player is tasked with looking after a plant shop they inherited. By interacting with the townspeople, you'll learn more about the plants you're caring for, discover new species throughout the land, and uncover secrets of a dark mystery plaguing the town. You do this by flipping through your horticulture book and using its vague descriptions to identify the various species of plants in your shop. To gather new plants and pages for the book, you'll need to decipher various letters delivered to you each day and help out the various customers that enter your shop. It's these little puzzles and quandaries that make the game so endearing. While some simply ask you to find a certain place on the map, others will have various codes or hidden messages that need to be figured out in order to progress. Some plants will have similar qualities, so you have to take great care in deciding which best fits the criteria for a customer's request. The game is full of moments that make you feel like a master detective, creating a truly immersive, dreary atmosphere that had me excited to flip through the pages of my textbook to find a solution to the current problem. While the hint system is extremely generous, basically giving away the answer if you'd like it to do so, it's not really necessary. I only used it twice in the whole game, and once was because I forgot that I had already labeled one of my plants. But it is a great crutch for those who get stuck when the game's descriptions become a bit too ambiguous. The story is engaging, but not particularly exciting. Each new character does offer an interesting perspective on the town's goings-on, and choosing their ultimate fates by selecting various plants to solve their problems can lead to interesting endings, but the game doesn't flesh them out as much as it should, leaving the ending satisfying but not mind-blowing. Though the lore of the world where plants really do have magical power is interesting to uncover. That said, it's pretty odd that you can take a quick trip halfway across the map and back to pick up a random mushroom while your customer just sits in the shop waiting. It's normally something that wouldn't stand out, but in a game this immersive, it felt a bit odd. The visuals are excellent, brimming with creativity, portrayed in this unique, thick-lined art style. The effects on the rain and other objects showcase the great sound design as well, but the music can get slightly repetitive over the game's 6 to 7 hour runtime. I also experienced some problems with plants moving between scenes, including the ones that aren't supposed to, which can be annoying when you're trying to keep them alphabetized for later customers. I do wish the potion crafting had been a bit more expansive, and it would have been helpful for correctly identified plants to label themselves, but those are minor nitpicks. While organizing plants in bottles and scrambling to fit everything you need onto a cluttered desk may sound boring to some, and the game certainly isn't for everybody, I think Strange Horticulture does an excellent job of putting you in your character's shoes in a way very few games are capable of. So if you're looking for a new kind of gaming experience that's excellently crafted, I highly recommend giving Strange Horticulture a try. Some of you are probably going to be surprised, or for some reason angry, that this game isn't at the top of my list, and the surprise is understandable. As far as From Software games go, Elden Ring is easily the most extensive, has the deepest lore, and will undoubtedly go down in history as one of the greatest games ever made. The scale of the boss fights is larger than ever, the controls are just as tight, while the options given to the player are more extensive and varied than ever before, somehow giving a 100+ hour game even more replay value. And all of this is wrapped up in one of the most stunning art styles I've ever seen. I want to be extremely clear, Elden Ring is an incredible, sometimes unbelievable achievement in gaming. Occasionally, I just wander around the environment aimlessly and stumble into a new side quest or challenge, or just take in the beauty, forgetting about the gigabytes of space I was wasting on my hard drive since my capture card was running. Some of you that saw my video on game difficulty may be thinking that the reason this game isn't topping the list is because of its challenge, but not only did I say that the lack of an easy mode isn't a reason to disparage a game, and not only is the top game on this list even harder in some cases, but more importantly, I loved the challenge here. Aside from the Crucible Knight and Misbegotten Warrior duo, which is just a heaping helping of bullshit. Plus, this game has more options than any other in From Software's catalog when it comes to making the experience easier, from summoning spirit ashes to elemental damage and weapon arts. So why isn't it at the top? The same reason I wouldn't give it a perfect score in a review. It still clings on to the many outdated design elements that From Software games are known for. Absolutely terrible and underexplained UI that can only be fully understood with the use of a wiki is inexcusable in 2022. Some quest lines are so obtuse and abstract that they're nearly impossible to complete unless you get lucky or know what you're looking for. While some actions like summoning have been made easier, limiting them to consumable items makes the game tedious, particularly when trying to find larval tiers to respec your build. Horse combat is super clunky, while also making certain areas and bosses out in the overworld trivial. Of course, none of this makes Elden Ring a bad game, it's just mildly frustrating for reasons outside of its difficulty far more often than it should be. In an objective list, this game might have made it to the top, but it wasn't my favorite of the year. However, I do want to end on a positive, so let me give the game the greatest compliment I could possibly give. Elden Ring not only lived up to the hype surrounding it, but exceeded it in nearly every way. I usually don't buy DLC. Even when I really love a game, I'm usually satisfied with the main experience and don't see the point in playing some tacked-on bonus content that's almost never as good as the original. Cuphead, the delicious last course, is an exception to that rule. Ever since its announcement, I've been eagerly awaiting the opportunity to hop back into this beautifully crafted world and defeat a bunch of new, challenging boss fights. Even with all of that excitement, the delicious last course exceeded my expectations. The goal is to go around the map collecting ingredients for Chef Saltbaker's magic pie to bring Miss Chalice back to life, and at its core, it's just more Cuphead. New island, new bosses, new weapons, and even a new character, but really just more Cuphead, which is more than enough to be one of the best games this year. The bosses are as well designed as ever, with the difficulty being somewhere in line with the second and third islands from the main game. Many bosses also have unique gimmicks unseen in the original game that give each of them their own identity. And of course, the imagination in bringing these characters to life is astounding, with the top-notch animation and music continuing to put Cuphead in the upper echelon of video game presentation. The new weapons are cool additions as well, though one has a homing attack that's moderately overpowered. Inkwell Isle 4 also has a few special secrets to make things just a bit more interesting. One of which is the King's Challenge Rooms, a group of mini-boss fights against various chess pieces that force you to use parry attacks instead of weapons. They're an excellent substitute for the game's run-and-gun sections, adding a ton of variety, with some being among my favorite battles in the game. Lastly, we have the addition of Miss Chalice as a third playable character. By replacing your normal power-up with a cookie, you can bring Miss Chalice into the fight and take advantage of her unique skill set throughout the DLC and main game alike. She's got a lot of benefits too, with an invincible dodge roll, dash parries, her own super attack, a triple shot in the plane, and even starting each fight with 4 HP. While not an entirely new experience, it does offer enough of a twist to make replaying the original game as Chalice a worthwhile endeavor. This DLC may be short at only 3 or so hours, but it's priced appropriately at only $8. And with all of this incredible content being added to one of the best games of the past decade, the delicious last course lives up to its name and sets a new standard for downloadable content in the future. The best word I can use to describe Tinykin is delightful. Combining the likes of Pikmin with a collectathon platformer seems like it could be cumbersome. The game could have easily turned into a mess, where using the Tinykin brought the platforming to a screeching halt and ruined the pacing of the game. Luckily, this genre fusion avoids that pitfall to be one of the most fun and fluid 3D platformers to date. Each level is relatively simple. Just hop in, explore the oversized environment, find some of those little alien creatures, and use their unique abilities to solve small puzzles and platforming challenges. In that regard, it's not all that different from Banjo-Kazooie or Mario Odyssey, but that's where the Tinykin come in. Each of these little guys has their own special power that adds to the fun of platforming rather than just being a gimmick. Using them to make a ladder, activate switches, blow something up, and more makes for a ton of fun with new applications of their powers around every corner. It's a near-flawless game loop that feeds back on itself over and over again, where exploring new areas gives you access to more Tinykin, which in turn gives you the ability to reach new areas, and the snappy controls make the process of doing so an absolute blast. The ability to skate around on a bar of soap or float through the air means you'll rarely be moving slowly, and every part of the map is only a few seconds away despite their size. The levels give enough direction to get the player started, while still leaving plenty of room for exploration. And the cute graphics and unique uses for the oversized environment are always a treat. So much so that I actually 100% completed this game. Tinykin isn't the most technically impressive, story-rich, or complex game from this year, but it knows what it is, has a unique concept, and uses that simple premise to maximize the fun players will get out of their experience. And what more could you really ask of a game? When I first saw the announcement for God of War Ragnarok, I wasn't all that excited. God of War 2018 is an excellent game, but not one I'd consider a masterpiece. Hearing that the sequel was not only going to introduce the conflict with the rest of the Norse gods, but also be the ending of the entire story in this new realm, had me worried that the game would be a cluttered mess with far too much complexity to tell a cohesive, engaging story, while also being a fun game in its own right. I was wrong. God of War Ragnarok is a crowning achievement in gaming. It makes the first game look like a prologue, as though everything experienced in Kratos' journey thus far has led to this exact moment. The story is original, complex, meaningful, and constantly surprising. Every piece fits into place perfectly, and when I wasn't playing the game, all I could think about was what could possibly come next. The world itself is full of deep lore and gives a ton of perspective on what's happened to each of the 9 realms, making your attempts to heal them all the more meaningful. The themes are deeply philosophical and handled in the mature nature they deserve to really get the player thinking about their own understanding of the world. And of course, there's the character writing. Every single character in this game is well written and feels like a real person. You could put any two in a room and I'd want to hear the conversation between them. They're complex, interesting, relatable, and often hilarious as well. The endless ways the game modifies its dialogue based on the circumstances or order in which you complete various tasks is unlike anything I've ever seen from an open-world game. It just makes everything feel so much more alive. And the emotional journey of Kratos and Atreus is one that isn't just entertaining, but will surely impact anyone who plays in ways you wouldn't expect and possibly come to a better understanding of yourself in the process. Not only that, but the small conversations that occur while traveling to your destination are all so entertaining that sometimes I just chill in the boat waiting for a story to end before proceeding. The slow traversal never feels tiring because there's always a new interaction between the characters that helps you better understand them while also making you want to hear even more. The combat has also improved. Gone are the copy-paste mini-bosses from the previous game, instead replaced with unique and exciting encounters that keep the players constantly on their toes. Even the normal enemies have a ton of variety with their own unique challenges depending on their various combinations, similar to those found in God of War 2. Every weapon, ability, and new feature has a purpose and is a blast to experiment with. So often I would see what a new power was capable of and immediately think, oh, now this is gonna be fun. Exploring the 9 realms is an absolute delight with the beautiful art direction and varied environmental hazards, keeping each feeling like its own unique ecosystem. The collectibles and side quests offer interesting bouts of exploration and puzzle solving that grant just enough rest between combat encounters to make for a natural ebb and flow, making the highs higher while never feeling boring. Content-wise, Ragnarok has enough to comprise 2 entire games worth, and yet it never feels poorly paced. Quite the opposite, in fact. It felt like no matter where I went or what I chose to do, the game was always ready to surprise and delight with something brand new and even better around the next corner. Of the over 700 games I've played in my life, there are less than 15 that I'd give a perfect 10 out of 10 score. God of War Ragnarok is one of them. It's an unforgettable experience that anyone who plays games should go out of their way to play at some point in their life. It somehow leaves you satisfied with what you've played, desperately yearning for more, and excited for what's to come. God of War Ragnarok is my game of the year for 2022. So that's my list of every game I played in 2022. Please let me know in the comments down below which ones were your favorites, and maybe I'll give them a shot at some point. 2022 was a very interesting year and sort of a return to normalcy for a lot of us. I know there were a lot of good and a lot of bad things, but I genuinely hope that all of you had a wonderful year, and I hope you all have an incredible 2023. With that said, keep an eye out for more videos in the future, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, have a mighty nifty day today.